As the US economy is officially in recession, ending its longest run of growth in history. The National Bureau of Economic Research says the downturn began in February, even before the coronavirus lockdown measures were put in place. Despite that, stock markets actually rising on Wall Street, with the Nasdaq index hitting a record high. Well, for more, let's talk to our business editor, Stephen Carroll. Stephen, it's not a surprise, is it, the US is in recession, but what's the significance, do you think, of this news?
It's a landmark moment in the global recession that's being caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The US is the world's #1 economy. What happens in the US has an impact around the world on economies and production lines, and also where consumers or companies are exporting goods to. So it does have an impact all over the world. This news coming as the World Bank says that this year's recession for the global economy will be a contraction of over 5%. So it is telling us where we are in the journey that is going to be the global recession of 2020. The National Bureau of Economic Research doesn't follow the exact same rules as most other countries when it comes to declaring a recession. In most places, you need 2 quarters or 6 months of a contraction in growth. The NBER uses what it says is a few months of a sharp downturn in the economy, and it says that is now in evidence since we reached a peak in economic activity and employment in the United States in February of this year. Normally, the NBER takes a little bit longer to officially declare a recession, but this time around it says the drop in activity has been so significant that it's able to say now at this stage in mid-June that we are in a recession in the United States. That converse reaction on the stock market, though, we did see shares rise, and in fact the S&P 500, which is the broadest index of US shares, has now recouped all of the losses that it's had. That 30% slump since mid-March on the S&P 500 now erased, despite this news confirming the US is in recession. A couple of reasons for that. One is optimism among investors about the response to the crisis, both from central banks and from governments, and some jobs data that came out of the US on Friday showing that jobs were created in the US economy in May, perhaps indicating that the worst is over when it comes to job losses. We know that tens of millions of jobs have been lost in the US during this crisis. So some reading that as perhaps having turned a corner. No real confirmation, of course, of that for some time until we see what happens next as lockdown measures are lifted in some parts of the United States. This is a part of a broader picture, of course, of a global recession, though the Congressional Budget Office last week warning that it'll take the US economy 10 years to recover overall. So where there might be indications of the corner being turned in some senses, there's certainly a long path to recovery for the US economy.
Well, meanwhile, here in France, Stephen, the government to announce its long-awaited rescue plan for the aerospace industry later. What can we expect?
A really key industry here in France, around 200,000 people employed, dominated by the names Airbus, Safran, Dassault and Thales. The French government going to be announcing a plan worth billions of euros, 10 billion, one figure being reported by the newspaper Les Echos on Monday. That's going to include things like a solidarity fund for the industry. We've got reports as well that there'll be introduction of a scrappage scheme for older aircraft to encourage airlines to buy more environmentally friendly aircraft. And of course generate business for those key industries that employ so many people here in France. You know, Airbus alone has more than 10,000 suppliers in its chains. There's a huge network outside of these major companies that also depend on there being business in the airline industry, which of course there hasn't been since global travel ground to a halt earlier this year. Airbus's CEO has said the survival of the company is in question because of this crisis. They had no new orders in May. We know we've had serious warnings from other major players in this industry as well. The French government stepping in to hope to try and save those jobs and that business. It's only the latest in a string of government bailouts. The government in France already announcing a rescue plan worth 18 billion for the tourist industry, 8 billion for the motor industry, and Air France getting 7 billion in government-backed loans as well. We'll wait to see until later today how much they're giving to the aerospace industry.
Stephen Carroll, our business editor, thanks very much.